All right, we'll get back to the meeting. So with that, I'd like to recognize Chairman Woodson with the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call on Assistant Chief of Fisheries, Jason Henegar, for an update on brook trout.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Commission, for letting me come and speak on brook trout management in Tennessee today. First of all, I want to thank Trout Unlimited for all their support and not only support but friendship over the years in trout management across the state. They've worked on many and funded many of our restoration projects, and they have a big effort in getting kids outdoors and make a connection with children to the outdoors through their Trout in the Classroom program, which is funded by those conservation funds. But, I'll be talking just a little bit about the restoration, past, present, and future of brook trout in Tennessee. Just a brief overview. Be talking about the history, current distribution of brook trout in Tennessee, some of our restoration and enhancement efforts, and the propagation efforts that we started recently and have had some successes with, and then also some future work that we're looking to do. Just one note, I'm not going to play this video. I've got a link here to a video that Freshwater Illustrated created on brook trout in Tennessee and some of our management. It's about a 9-minute video, and just wanted to provide that to the Commission and the public if you wanted to look at that at a later date. It's a really good production. So why are we talking about brook trout? They're Tennessee's only native trout species, and they serve several significant roles. These fish usually inhabit first order streams, high elevation, and are often the only fish that are located in these streams. They serve as a keystone species for the Appalachian Mountains and serve a very important fishing legacy and heritage in the mountains of Tennessee. They're also known as specks or speckled trout, mountain trout, and then of course native trout or brookies. Just a quick look at the distribution of brook trout. The original thought was there was a northern population and a southern Appalachian population, which we have here in Tennessee. That has since changed through advanced genetic techniques to 6 clades or distinct genetic groups, with most of your domestic hatchery stock of brook trout coming from the northern Atlantic slope populations. There's a coaster population, Great Lakes clade, northern interior and southern interior, which is what the Tennessee population is characterized as, is the southern interior clade. Some of the major problems with brook trout in Tennessee and throughout their range in Appalachia was the intensive logging in the late 1880s through the 1950s. And as logging harvested many of the forestry resources that was characterized in Appalachia, they nearly destroyed one of its biggest gems in brook trout. We also had a boom in logging in the 1980s through the 1990s that also left a lot of brook trout populations in Tennessee very vulnerable. About 70% of Tennessee's brook trout are now located on Cherokee National Forest, where they have some type of protection or increased management of those streams and the forests that surround them. Some of the present threats to brook trout, of course, is habitat loss through development. A lot of vacation homes and a lot of people moving back to the mountains to live in East Tennessee and throughout the Appalachian Mountains. And then also habitat loss due to weather patterns and pollution. Air pollution and the issues we've had with acid rain on the forest in Appalachia have had a major effect on brook trout habitat. Then also encroachment and replacement by non-native trout, both rainbow and brown trout, throughout their range has been an issue. These fish were brought in after the declines in brook trout from logging and other issues to try to reestablish trout fisheries. And unknowingly, these fish they compete very well with our native brook trout and for those cold water resources. And then also a limitation of brook trout in Tennessee is they're genetically unique, not only from their northern counterparts, but also you can find genetic differences across a ridgeline from stream to stream in Tennessee as great as some of the genetic difference between the northern and southern brook trout. So previous distribution surveys in the 1970s and 80s give us a look at exactly how hard brook trout had been hit by all the different threats that they've faced. They estimated that there was about 93 miles of brook trout habitat left in 73 streams, and they estimated that 70 to 80% of the historic range of brook trout had been lost by the 1970s and 80s, and possibly in 30 years that there would be no brook trout in Tennessee at all due to the great decreases in populations. In 1990, when we went back in and looked at the distribution of brook trout, we saw something pretty different. There'd been a lot of effort to protect brook trout and maintain some populations and even expand through some restoration projects. And we found that there was about 147 miles of brook trout stream, and we found those in 106 streams. So we had gained some ground into the 90s. 71 of those 73 streams that was surveyed in the 70s and 80s still have brook trout. They were hanging on pretty tough. Like I said, we'd found new populations and been able to work on several restoration projects to increase that distribution across the state. This is a map of genetic makeup of our brook trout populations outside of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This was an earlier estimation of genetics for our populations, and this was based on an older technique, allozyme technique that we found within the last 5 or 6 years that there was a lot of error in this technique, and it wasn't predictive error, and that's the need to go back and look at the genetic distribution of our populations across the state, and that's what Trout Unlimited is helping make possible through their donation. So in 2011, our trout biologists in Region 4 and Region 3 decided it was time to go back and do another distribution sample and look at brook trout across their range in Tennessee. It had been 20 years since the last sample. It was within that 30-year prediction time from the 70s and 80s that they had predicted that we would lose brook trout altogether. So we were really interested in seeing what gains or losses we had again. So the methods was to go back into those 106 streams and then also look at some other streams that we hadn't looked at in the past to see if brook trout was available in those. We would identify the lower distribution limits of those fish in each stream and take GPS coordinates and then measure the differences in that previous survey in the 90s against the 2011 survey. So based on those 106 streams that were surveyed in 1990 and also in 2011, we saw that in 46 streams there was a loss. 10 populations were gone completely due to possibly drought situations or just loss of habitat. We had gains in another 35 streams, and this we had 2 recolonizations, and I'll talk about those just briefly maybe at the end. But had no change in 26 of those 106 streams. So those populations seem to be stable, and but we had a net change of about 14.1 kilometers or 8.76 miles. I'll apologize, a lot of the figures here are in kilometers, and 1 mile equals 1.6 kilometers, so just to help out with some of the translation there. But we only had about 6% loss overall in our brook trout distribution between the 1990s and 2011. And they had predicted that we would lose brook trout altogether in 30 to 50 years. So looking a little deeper into where we had those losses in brook trout distribution, most of that occurred, 73% of it occurred in the Watauga watershed, and with only a slight loss in some of the other major watersheds that we have brook trout in here in Tennessee. One of the possible reasons for that was a historic flood in 1998 in the Upper Doe River watershed. That is a major part of the Watauga watershed, and that happened there from Rome Mountain, Hampton, Valley Forge, and Elizabethton, and there was a rise of almost 11 feet in the Doe River in about 4 hours, and the flood duration was about 4 hours. So it was an extreme flash flood that was set up due to snow on Rome Mountain and high amounts of rain in about a 4-hour period. There was 7 people that lost their lives in that flood, and about 200 homes that were destroyed along the river. Major flood that altered habitat throughout the Watauga watershed there. So digging into some of the results a little more, 48 streams were open to invasion. That's invasion by rainbow and brown trout that moved into some of those streams during times where the brook trout numbers were down. So lost about 9 miles to invasion during that time, and 37 streams could be compared back to the 1980 surveys, and we'd only lost since 1980 about 2.4 miles for about 5% of that distribution since the 1980s. Some other changes in distribution that occurred was that we found some undocumented populations in 3 streams, and then we also worked on restoration and enhancement projects to account for some more addition of brook trout habitat and population. This is just a list of our restoration and enhancement efforts with brook trout. I have 3 highlighted here, 3 streams highlighted. The left prong of Hampton Creek was a very intensive restoration that Region 4 and Trout Unlimited and several other agencies worked on, and that stream has been restored to be one of our premier brook trout populations. There's more brook trout per kilometer in that stream than any other stream outside Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The Sycamore Creek and the Little Stony restorations were part of our propagation work that I'll talk about in just a few minutes, but the fish from those streams were restored using our new propagation techniques. So current distribution, we've had a couple surveys in 2016 and 17 in an effort to collect genetic material for this genetic work that we're getting ready to start with USGS and Tennessee Tech. And through that work, we were able to add a few updates to that 2011 through 13 sample. And We've continued to lose a little ground on the overall kilometers of brook trout in the state of Tennessee, but we have gained a few more populations. We're up to about 109 populations in the state of Tennessee. So. We currently have about 138 miles of brook trout habitat and brook trout populations throughout the state. This is just a look at our brook trout population compared to the cold water habitat that's available in the state of Tennessee. We have about 621 miles of cold water habitat that's inhabited by trout, and brook trout make up about 22% of that. Inhabited about 138 miles. This just goes into how some of these interactions of brook trout and the non-native trout play out. You can see by this graph, brook trout's on the bottom, and rainbow trout is what we're looking at here on Rocky Fork. And we followed this through time, and you can see that the flood event of 94 gave rainbow trout a little bit of an advantage, and but as climate changes and water and drought or wet and dry years ebb and flow, we're going to see differences in the brook trout populations, and they seem to fight their way back and compete well. We've had several streams that we're actually managing now as mixed populations of rainbow and brook trout, Sycamore Creek being one of those. I spoke just briefly about recolonization. These are some streams that in 1991 brook trout had been essentially pushed to the upper limits of those streams, and rainbow trout or brown trout had moved in and kind of closed off populations. And since then we have seen through these dry and wet periods and the increase or decrease of rainbows and browns, these brook trout have been able to move back and fight their way back and reestablish populations and recolonize some sections of those streams where they had lost in the past. So in conclusion of the distribution surveys, just that brook trout are likely going to ebb and flow. They're going to be transitional areas, and that's going to be linked to local weather patterns, local scale events that's going to have impacts on brook trout. Some additional populations are likely to be lost due to that. There's some populations that are just marginal populations, very small in size, and we may lose those, and that's where restoration efforts or enhancement efforts are going to be very important. And the genetics information is a key to a lot of those restoration enhancement efforts with the genetic diversity that we have in our southern population of brook trout. So talk just a little bit about the propagation of brook trout, and this was made possible by a lot of work and a lot of funding from Trout Unlimited. They actually this is located at Tellico Hatchery, and in the 1990s they went there to Tellico Hatchery and helped out with creating just a simple circular concrete raceway into this building. And this is where the propagation work in the early 1990s started. And as we tried to develop that propagation in the early 90s, it was very labor intensive. We didn't have the changes in aquaculture, the technology in aquaculture that we have today, and you didn't have the availability of food, natural food for these fish that we do today. And so due to the amount of labor that was required to do this, it was just easier to go and get adult fish from good populations of brook trout and move those to streams that you were trying to restore. So that's kind of what we did through the 90s and early 2000s, was just relocate fish into streams and try to reestablish populations. In 2011, with all the changes in aquaculture, we decided that it might be good to look at trying propagation again and see where we could go with that, because as drought hits populations and knocks those back, fish may not be available. There was a lot of talk about low water, and as Frank mentioned during the regulation setting, Tellico hatchery had experienced a lot of drought and a lot of warm water temperatures, and so we were worried that our brook trout may be going through a down period. So we decided to start this back up, and we reopened this building and got everything up and running, and added we were actually able to go and get brood fish out of the wild and produce fingerlings the first year. With that excitement, the Tennessee Aquarium became interested in joining us in our efforts, and they were able to build a recirculating system in 2012, and they've been running that system since and producing fish for us to stock. We added a spring-fed system at Irwin State Hatchery in 2013 and was able to produce fish there as well, and developed a graduate project that wrote the book on southern Appalachian brook trout propagation, essentially. So, just one thing to mention here, in 2016 we saw low water levels and high temperature, and we were forced to discontinue the use of the brook trout work at Tellico hatchery. We're looking to reestablish that this year with some improvements to our system and things like that. Like I said, Tennessee Aquarium is still producing brook trout for us to use in restoration efforts. This genetic information that we'll get from the work TU sponsoring will help us better manage both the propagation and our relocation efforts, and put fish where we think they'll do the best. So, some successes in brook trout. We have developed, through the distribution work, we've developed a comprehensive GIS layer and have a better understanding where we have strong populations of brook trout to pull from for future restoration work. We've resurveyed brook trout distribution, developed many relationships and partnerships with Trout Unlimited, with Tennessee Aquarium, and through the partnership with the Tennessee Aquarium, they actually have brook trout as one of their centerpieces there for the public to see, and they highlight their efforts and our efforts in restoration and protection of brook trout. So we've gained a lot of public support through that program. Developed new techniques through our propagation work that other states are actually looking at propagation of southern Appalachian brook trout. We've used brook trout in some of our other hatcheries, our federal hatcheries, and we've actually enhanced tailwaters with brook trout and added a species for anglers to catch in our tailwaters. These are the more domestic strains of the northern fish, and we stock those in areas where we don't think we'll have any overlap with our southern fish. We added to our statewide trout plan a brook trout management that will lead our efforts in restoration for the next 5 to 10 years with brook trout management. And with this genetic information, we'll be able to really hone in on a lot of those projects and make greater, hopefully make greater advancements in restoring brook trout. Like I mentioned many times, the future focus area is to reassess genetic inventory and help guide our efforts even better. We want to restore and enhance more of those populations in the Watauga watershed, where we have lost a majority of our fish there. We're working on projects currently with the state of North Carolina to reintroduce heritage genetics back into the Nolichucky watershed. We've lost all the original brook trout populations in the Nolichucky watershed and have been successful in reintroducing some fish from the Watauga and other watersheds, but we would like to move back to that heritage stock, and we're making some progress with North Carolina on being able to do that. We have developed a priority list of restoration efforts, and this genetic information will only aid in helping us fine-tune that priority list in restoration. And then we continue to evaluate the utility of our propagation and how that will be used into the future with restoration of brook trout. And with that, that concludes everything I have.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the commission? Yes, sir. Commissioner Swan.
I have one question. I know that in Sycamore Creek we had an intensive stocking effort and an intensive effort to remove rainbow trout, which I participated in a couple of those surveys, but it's my understanding that we're not stocking brook trout into Sycamore Creek anymore.
It's only because of that dry, warm period. We've lost some of the lower distribution. We still have good populations of brook trout in the middle, which we kind of had a marginal population before our efforts, and we will likely pick that back up as soon as we can get that.
So you'll still start raising the fingerlings again?
We will. That is our plan to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Great. Thank you so much,
Thank
Jason.
you.
I really appreciate your time and diligence in the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. And with that, I'll turn to Chief Frank Fiss to walk members through the proclamations that were passed in the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The first proclamation is Proclamation 1810 on the commercial fishing proclamation. There was an amendment discussed yesterday, and I have that amendment to show you where it would fit into the red line copy. It falls into section 2E, and it would add this language of or greater than 34 inches into the types of catfish that cannot be kept alive once harvested by commercial fishermen. This is the commercial fishing proclamation.
Great. Thank you very much, Frank. Members, if you'll recall, this is an amendment that was raised by Commissioner Woods. It was unanimously supported by the members of the committee, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I fully recommend the Fisheries recommendation on Proclamation, 1810, as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Take that in form of a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second from Commissioner Holbert. So any discussion amongst the commission? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of Proclamation 1810, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Proclamation passes.
Thank you. Chief, you're recognized on Proclamation 1811.
This is the commercial mussel proclamation. We just had housekeeping work to do, and the list of the sections to be deleted are in front of you here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee unanimously recommended Proclamation 1811 as written and proposed by the agency. I'll make the appropriate motion for passage.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Take that in form of a motion. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Stroud. Is there any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? All in favor of the passage of Proclamation 1811, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
You opposed? Proclamation passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Fiss, if you would share the information related to Proclamation 1812 regarding bait.
Okay. The bait proclamation was, I had a longer presentation, but it all boils down to this one recommendation, which is that skipjack, herring, gizzard shad, and threadfin shad cannot be transported away from the water alive from the Mississippi River, Barkley, Kentucky, Pickwick reservoirs, and their tributaries or oxbows of these waters. And the restriction would not apply above Normandy Dam on the Duck River system.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee unanimously recommended the agency's proposal for Proclamation 1812. I make the appropriate motion, and just as a reminder, and for those who may be watching today who perhaps were not with us yesterday, we had a full discussion with members of the committee, non-members of the committee, as well as the public yesterday, and received a great deal of information. And again, the limited restriction was the recommendation of the agency and was unanimously supported by all members of the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I take that form of a motion. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Woods. Is there a discussion from the Commission?
I'd like to just say something right quick. I understand where we're going. I'm just going to reiterate my concern. It is my sincere hope that I am wrong, and but I hope that the Commission next year will and the agency will really pay good attention to this, because it really bothers me that we're leaving the door open and we're only going to react when it's too late, because we're very cautious about the user groups involved and pressure from them, and I think we need to be careful about managing. And I'm not saying anything negative about Frank. I know it's in the agency guys, but I think we need to be real careful of this. I hope that the next commission will take a look at this next year.
Commissioner Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate what Bill's saying. I think we're sitting here playing Russian roulette as far as a management standpoint on Asian carp. We're gonna react once we see them. When we react to that, we're too late. It's not this isn't one deer that's going to breed and reproduce one. You get 20 carp in there, and when they spawn, we have no control as an agency to stop that. And I think we're very foolish for not following the recommendations that Arkansas and Kentucky do. I think that it is a huge hindrance. I think that we're taking a chance of decimating a population of fish by letting these Asian carp a chance that they could get transported. And I understand it's a long shot, and all the striper guys here, I appreciate you guys coming. But I really think that we are doing ourselves a highly injustice by not banning these fish being moved. I hope I'm wrong. But I guarantee you, if we ask a city council of Paris, Tennessee today what they'd do, I guarantee I know what the answer would be. And I think we're making a strong decision by not banning the movement of bait across the whole state.
Any other discussion from the Commission? Discussion from the public? Hearing none, all in favor of the passage of Proclamation 1812, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. One opposition from Commissioner Baker, and the proclamation passes. Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proclamation 1813 on sport fishing. Chief Fiss.
Okay, there were several recommendations in the through the same presentation. Again, would you, Chairman, like me to go through the whole presentation?
I think you've just synthesized
Yeah,
the recommendations previously, and if you could
yes,
keep that ball rolling.
Yes, there were.
We're happy to hear it all again, though.
There were recommendations for Calderwood Reservoir, the Tellico River area, and Watts Bar to control the paddlefish fishery. Those were the major components of the recommendations.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee recommended Proclamation 1813 as proposed by the agency unanimously, and I would make the appropriate motion for passage.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner McLaren. Discussion from the commission.
I'd like to make an amendment. Can I do that now?
Yes.
I'd like to make an amendment to 18-13 on the size limits on Dale Hollow Lake. The current size limit is a 16 to a 21 inch size limit with 2 fish. You're allowed 2 fish under 16 or 1 fish under 16 and 1 over 21. Mr. Thurman's research shows us that the age class of fish, we don't have very many fish that ever reach the 21-inch size limit there because the lake is getting older. It was built in 1943. It's 27,000 acres. I would like to see that. I understand why the structure was put there completely, and it's done a great job. But for more opportunity for the younger fishermen that are coming up doing the high school fishing, for the tournament angler, instead of, I really wanted a long time ago to do a 5-fish 18-inch size limit, but what I would recommend there is changing that slot limit from a 16 to a 21 to a 16 to a 20, lowering that slot limit 1 inch and having the capability to have 2 fish. You could have 2 over 20 or 2 under 16 or any combination too, but you'd be able to have 1 more fish over the slot limit and have 1 inch smaller on the slot limit, which still is protecting all the majority of the fish that will be spawning to protect the population.
Okay, so just so I'm understanding, you're saying a slot limit of keeping 2 fish greater than 21 and keeping
being able to keep 2 fish is your limit.
Okay.
But having the slot limit, instead of being 16 to 21, have it 16 to 20.
Okay.
Lowering the size of the slot limit 1 inch, and having the ability to have 2 fish over instead of just having 1 fish over. Still be the extremely most protected fishery in the whole state by a long shot, by all our standards, but it would give more opportunity for anglers that are fishing in the tournament world that are coming up. It's highly popular. We've been discriminating against those guys for many, many years, but this small change would at least give people more ability to be able to enjoy their tournament.
So we have a recommendation for an amendment of a slot limit on Dale Hollow Lake, 2 fish limit, the slot limit between 16 and 20 inches.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Do I have a second on that motion? Second from Commissioner Swan. Discussion on the amendment from the commission.
I'd like to hear the response from the agency.
Frank, could you give us the agency response on this, please?
We would like to keep Proclamation 1813 as presented and not make that change. We have we provided last month a significant amount of information about what people that are fishing smallmouth on the lake would support. That nobody has had an opportunity to look at this proposal. This is different again, so that information may not apply, but our sense is that what we have on the ground there is what we should have, and that's what the community expects at this time. We know there's significant use of that system by fishermen of all sorts. You know, not every community has a goal of being a tournament fishing destination. They're making their money on other types of tourism, so we got to respect that as well. So, but in short, our recommendation, or we would not support that recommendation.
Any discussion from the commission? Commissioner McLaren?
Dale Hollow happens to sit in my backyard, so I have look at these folks every day. The boat dock owners, the fishermen, a lot of my own family fish on Dale Hollow. When As last month, the agency gave us the summary of their largest public opinion survey that we've ever done, over 500 people. I think it's reckless of us to be changing things that's not supported by the agency, not supported by the public, and not supported by the boat dock owners that have a lot invested in that sport and in that resource.
Commissioner Woodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a refresher for those members who've slept since last month when we met, we had a 2 days of preview from the Fisheries Committee, or pardon me, 1 full day in committee from the Fisheries Committee on each of these proclamations. And this specific issue was requested to be discussed by the committee to understand the significant amount of research that the agency has done. I think it was probably about a 30-minute presentation. I know that not all of the members of commission were there. The proposer of this amendment was not present. However, we made sure that that data and information was shared via email, as well as the link on the video, to make sure that all members of commission had access to the survey data that Commissioner McLaren just referenced. It was compelling information as to why the agency is not making the recommendation to change the slot limit at Dale Hollow. It was compelling at the time, and I have not heard any data that would contradict that information in the last 30 days from the public or from any other source. Probably that, combined with the commissioner who serves and represents that community as an appointee on this commission, compelled me to respectfully oppose this amendment.
Any other discussion on the commission? Any discussion from the public? All in favor of the amendment proposed to limit to change the slot limit at Dale Hollow Lake for a 2-fish limit, slot limit of 16 to 20 inches, let it be known by saying aye. How many? Who was that? 2. Okay. All opposed? No. The amendment fails. We're back. You'd like to have a roll call vote? Okay. So, Danette, would you please call the roll? And Danette, do it in the traditional order.
Okay. Chad Baker. Angie Box. Bill Cox. No. Dennis Gardner. Connie King. No. Tony Sanders. No. James Stroud. Bill Swan. No. Kent Woods. No. Jamie Woodson. Brian McLaren. No. Kurt Holbert. No. Jeff Cook.
2 yes, 11 no.
Thank you, Danette.
2 yes, 11 no.
Thank you. So we're back on the Proclamation 1013 as passed by the Fisheries Committee. So further discussion on Proclamation 1013 from the Commission. Any discussion from the public? So all in favor of Proclamation 1013, let it be known by saying aye. Any opposed? The proclamation passes.
That is all from the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Angie, you're going to try to say something?
I'm going to try to. I just I have just an idea and a request to think about something if y'all could do that for me. Can you hear me? I was just wondering, we do a lot of support with archery shooting and clay sport shooting for kids, and I know a lot of this involvement, especially recruitment and retention, we're trying to get more kids involved. And my son mentioned to me last week, he said, Mom, why don't we do a fishing team at our school? I've got 5 kids that want to do a fishing team. And I said, okay, think about doing that. So I don't know, I don't hear a lot about that or anything about that. So from the agency, and I just would like to consider that maybe in the future to have more support. A fishing team, tournament fishing teams for schools. Did that come out okay? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Box. So that completes the Fisheries Management Committee, and now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Sanders for the Budget Committee.
I'd like to have Ken Tarkington come up and do the financial report.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. Uh-oh. Well, I cut it off up here. I guess you can look in on your iPads. I have a 3-page report reporting through the month of July of this year. And I think what you're showing at the top of your page on boat registration, for those who want to see it, can you get me set back up? Thanks. I think what you're looking at is a bracketed figure on the difference of what we collected this year versus last year of $413,000. What I try to do and what I have been doing is reporting to you what our the state's accounting system shows. It's taken several weeks, but due to reports and so forth, to vet that out, and the actual amount should be $778,000 collected in July instead of the $396, which shows only a difference of a little less than $32,000, which is a 4% variance rather than a 51%. And occasionally from year to year we will have large variances on months because of reporting periods and things that occurred this year that didn't last year and vice versa. But nevertheless, that actual figure of 396 should be 778, which should make perhaps all of us breathe a little easier. On the expense side of the boating fund, we've expended approximately 4.6% of the annual allotment. And in the middle of the page, the wildlife fund, we've are just about the same point in time, or just about the same dollar amount as this point in time last year, within 0.8%. The expense of the wildlife fund, we're approximately 3% of the annual allotment through July. On the endowments at the bottom of the page, watchable endowment has a balance of approximately $6.5 million with $4,300 that's available to transfer, and the lifetime endowment has almost $52 million as a balance in it. On the second page, the acquisition or the wetlands acquisition fund through July has $9,621,000. We've zeroed the maintenance out as usual. Thus far, there's been no expenses posted through July for maintenance. And on the compensation, which is the in lieu of tax, there's a current balance of $429,000. The third and final page is the investment statement provided by the Treasury, and this is actually through the month of July. Through the month of August, not July. And the current rate is 2.1% since inception. So we've seen a little bit of an increase. If you look in the upper right-hand column where it says monthly change in value, that's the fluctuation, accounts for the fluctuation for that month. So for August, we received almost a 0.5% increase, which resulted in $308,000 increase in value. Are there any questions or comments?
Just one quick question. I'm assuming the return we're getting is very much tied to the interest rate, federal rates and things like that. I haven't looked at what the investment is, but I'm sure it's conservative. And
Well, the SPIF rate that we have, that's the short-term investment that the state has had increased this past month. This is through August also. It's at 1.9%.
any other questions?
I got a question, please.
Commissioner?
The wetlands fund only increased $20-something thousand over $40-something thousand in a month. Isn't that, don't we usually get $1 million or $2 million a month?
We do, about $1.4 million. The state's accounting system accrues anything that is earned in July and in August because it's based on realty sales of May and June. So they accrue those and put them back into the prior year. So the first actual posting traditionally that we see of the new year will be in the September timeframe, as of the month of September. But the earnings are significant, or at least they have been.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, Chairman Cook, I suppose, or Commissioner Sanders, we talked about having an additional budget meeting to talk about their investment account and legislation that we might need to do. And I wonder when, you know, I won't say when, but I would urge you to let's go and have that meeting.
Yes, yeah, we are actually been working with Chris on best time to get that set up.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a request that the final page is kind of an eye chart anyway, and then to have it show up in a vertical view on these iPads, it makes it even more difficult to read. Every time you turn it over, it flips sideways on you again. So if I could request that those things show up in a landscape form so we could read them a little better, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
He's not the only one who requested that. I requested that several months ago.
We had been requested both ways, so I tell you what we'll do. We'll put it in there both ways, and then we can look at it. It is a little larger the way it is now, but we can certainly do both. Be glad to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know at our budget meeting in August, we talked a lot about the budget in its entirety, and the numbers that the commission was given haven't changed in terms of what the actual budget was, but I know we mentioned to you that there were some calculations going on that we felt were not quite in order, and we were working with some folks downtown to try to put those in a format that we thought we would understand better, and looking for any errors. I just wanted to report back to you that that has been corrected, at least on the boating fund, and that has been a little over $3 million back into our account that we had anticipated would be something not quite that high, but we're glad that it is. On the wildlife side, not quite to the end yet, but it looks like it's well over $1 million as well. So
I just want to confirm you didn't reject that money when it came to us, right?
no, sir. We asked if they could biggie size it.
Thank you, Director. All right, with that, I want to call Donald Hosse back to the podium to talk about Buffalo Ridge.
Thank you, Commissioner. Of course, here for approval of the budget expansion for 1920 for Buffalo Ridge Refuge of $5.57 million.
Chairman Cook, the Budget Committee met yesterday and make a recommendation that this be passed by the Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. We have a motion to approve and a second by Commissioner Woodson. Any discussion on the budget expansion?
I've got one request, and I know we were on an October 1st deadline on this, but when you get the breakdown of where all this money's going, you know, for the building and the whatever, could you get us that?
Yeah, and it's going to be tweaked somewhat. I've got Dwight Hensley from engineering, the cost analysis that he got from the state architect. I've actually got that right here, and I'd be more than happy to show you. And of course, I'm sure once we get the state architect and the building commission involved and start tweaking the final structure, that those numbers are going to be moved around a little bit. But
Well,
I
it's
do
just-
have the cost analysis.
I obviously support it. I think it's great,
Thank
but
you.
we're spending $5.5 million and with no paperwork to show us what you're doing. So
Yeah,
not
yes,
that we
sir.
distrust or anything. I just like to see, just like to look at it and see
Yes,
what's.
sir.
And
Thank
don't be conservative, right, Commissioner Cox?
Thank you all.
Commissioner Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a minute and thank the commission for supporting this project. Anytime as you say, anytime you can get Commissioner Cox to say don't be too conservative, something's got to be good about it. But anyway, I want to thank you for all supporting it. These guys, if you have not seen this place, which I got a feeling the ones that are going to be on the commission next year, you're going to get to see it for a couple days. But anyway, please take the time to go out there. This is an unbelievable WMA for the state of Tennessee. Don, you've done a heck of a job. Can't commend you enough for the job you've done with Wounded Warriors out there and the women. But anyway, just thank you, commissioners.
And thank you all for the support, and also our director, and as an agency in a whole, our volunteers and agency personnel. It's definitely a huge undertaking and a team effort, and I can't thank you all enough. Thank you.
Hey,
Commissioner Woods?
I got one question.
Yes, sir.
How many acres out of the 1,800 are you expecting to use for this?
Well, we're utilizing about all 1,800 for various components. The bulk of the property is across the river where the shooting complex is not going. That's where the barn's at, and the 40-plus tree stands, the 5 wheelchair blinds. We've got 10 miles of roads. Pretty much the shooting complex, and that's the beauty of it, the topography and the layout of the property is ideal for what we're proposing. Easy access off the interstate, hotels, restaurants, you know, right there 5 minutes from the venue. There's only one turn off Highway 13 to where the shooting complex, the Hunter Education Center, the community lakes all being proposed. And the bulk of the stuff's going to be in about a 30-acre area for the shooting stuff.
That's what I was getting at. I went last year.
Yes, sir. I remember you at the soldier hunt.
The Wounded Warrior, and that really touched me. That is something else there, and I really love the place. But I just wanted to see if it was going to involve any of that back there.
Yeah, and like I said, the beauty of it, the hunts, and that stuff's going to be taken across the river. We'll still utilize the hunting when possible with not conflicting with the shooting sports, but everything else is going to be across the river, so it works out great.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Done
sir.
a good job. Thank you.
Any other discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? All in favor of the budget expansion for Buffalo Ridge, let it known by saying aye. Any opposed? I think you'd be crazy to oppose it after that discussion. So,
Thanks again.
Chairman Cook, that concludes the Budget Committee.
thank you, Chairman Sanders. So that completes our agenda, and I'd like to remind the commission that Director Carter and our legal counsel like to discuss something about 10 minutes in private, so let's just stay here as soon as we're finished if we could. Our next meeting is October 25 and 26 in Nashville. So any comments or announcements from the commission?
May I follow up with what Commissioner Box, because this might be an outreach, who needs to have the discussion about, is this a committee thing or is this an interagency about how we might help these high school bass teams? Is that something that y'all get your fisheries or boating or whoever R3 people, who needs to follow up with that? I'm interested in, I don't know what we could do for them, just brainstorming.
I'm not sure either, Commissioner. To begin with, we totally support the idea and the whatever funding we could help them with. Right now, we really put little funding at all. It's done mostly on a regional basis when something occurs. There's two parts to it, I think. One, there was a fishing in the schools program that we participated in its early formative years. It kind of floundered a little bit on the national level, and we actually were partnering with Virginia and Florida and Bass Pro Shops to put that into place. It's taken a lull, but it's at our recent meeting in Tampa here last week or week before, whenever that was, that resurfaced, and I think that's going to be another program that we can look at again, either in conjunction with other states or with just singly within ours. It started out as fly fishing, then it's now has a branched off so that it also includes spin casting, which is much easier for most, especially young people, to get involved in. So that's one part of it. The bass tournaments, we will pull together a committee inside the agency and see what kind of brainstorming we can do. We do the archery in the schools program, and we do help them with an initial kit, for lack of a better word, that they utilize in putting that program into their school. They raise most of the money themselves, but we'll certainly explore what options we may have and see what kind of manufacturers that might want to help us with that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is what we were talking about. There's not really a lead organization statewide that we could work with to help all these high schools. They're kind of individualized.
To my knowledge, that's true. Is that Frank?
So
we would probably reach out to the Bass Nation high school level. We had Jake Davis here at the last meeting, and we are going to be working with him with high schools. Those are high school teams. But when it comes to getting those teams going, one of the critical things they need is people to partner with the school and provide the boats for the students to fish on. And a lot of that outreach is happening and being supported locally by the parents and friends of the school. So, we've had discussions with that group in the past. We're not really clear on the best way to help them with or with what funds we would do that. So,
I agree with Commissioner Woodson. We had a quick discussion that I think the recruitment and retention committee would be the right committee for that. So could maybe we could ask them to bird dog that for us. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just before we break, and there may be other business as well, but I wanted to recognize Sheila Dalton. Sheila is our regional administrator in Region 4. I'm not sure that y'all have met her. Forgive me, Sheila, I forget the number of years, pushing 35 years with the agency. She took over that position a few months ago and has done an outstanding job there. Just wanted to make sure you knew who she was. Raise your hand, Sheila, or stand.
So, Commissioner Cox?
Yeah, and since you did that, there's one more group that comes to the meetings, and we see them once or twice a year, is our local wildlife officers that come for, I don't know whether they come to eat cookies or come to protect us, but we appreciate y'all coming too.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Cox. I was going to thank everyone from Region 4. We've had a great, officers and the hospital staff and all the administrative folks. We've had a great couple of days here. The great tour of the North Cumberland WMA, and then a really fun dinner with Director Carter, and actually have Director Carter's daughter and granddaughter showing up. So glad y'all are here. And Commissioner Sanders.
I was just going to say, I want to thank Commissioner King for sharing her birthday today with my wife. My wife will not ever know I said this, but at least I've got proof if I needed to pull it out. Happy birthday to her. No more than 39, so I'm going to stick at that.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you, Connie.
And Commissioner Holbert.
Oh, and I need to tell my wife happy anniversary on the
I'll just say that. I'll say that to mine too, so if I forget, I did it that time. So any other comments from the commission? Connie, any? No, thank you. Okay. Director Carter?
No, sir.
All right. Well, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.